Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be with you all today. I'm glad to see so many people come. And as I mentioned, I'm happy to try to offer something like this again in the future if it's useful or you know other people who weren't able to make it today. So I had wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what brings you here today. But in the interest of time, I would say if anybody wants to add that information to the chat, and maybe Dave can review those as I'm talking and introducing myself. And if there's anything relevant, you could, Dave, feel free to jump in with that information. Um, so as Dave said, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I do work in counseling services. I'm the assistant director of counseling. One of our newest staff members is here with us today, Kevin Murphy, who just started last week. I invited him to be with us. And I'm also oh, there's Kevin. Hey, Kevin. I also am a registered yoga instructor. And so I've been teaching yoga for about 5 years, but practicing for much longer than that, about 20 years. And I really feel that there is a strong intersection between what I teach, what I do with my therapy clients, and what I teach in my yoga classes. And one of those strong intersections is mindfulness. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. And I want to tell you a little bit about what my goals are. My goals are to do some brief practice exercises, and they'll be short so we can get a sense of what works for you. And that's the mindful multiple choice of this program, is not every strategy works for every person. So I wanted to give you a few different options so that you have some ideas of what you can try and pick and choose. And then at the end, and I'm glad I built in a little extra time for this because I think we'll be okay even getting started late. About the last 10 minutes, I wanted to offer a guided meditation. And if you need to leave before 1:20, I want to highly respect people's times. Feel free. If you can't stay those last 10 minutes, we'll do a little wrap up before then. And then anyone who wants to stay will finish with the guided meditation. And it's really going to be kind of a combination of the techniques that we do here, mindfulness-based meditation. So I want to keep my intro relatively short. The only other thing that I want to add a little bit is to emphasize the need for self-care. As Dave said, even more so now with the pandemic, when we've had so many losses, so many drains on our energy, this really is, I use this analogy a lot, but even more so now, the analogy of when you're in an airplane and you hit turbulence and the oxygen mask comes down, you're always taught to put on your own oxygen mask first. So in order for us to be helpful for students, to colleagues, to family members, we really need to take care of our own needs. And that's what these strategies are designed to do. They are simple. That doesn't mean they're easy. They do take practice. You are not going to clear your head the first time you sit down to focus on your breath. I think of it at mindfulness strategies as like being a bicep curl for the brain. So no one lifts one weight and expects that, you know, they're going to be pumped. Well, maybe you do, but, you know, at least I think we recognize that's a little unrealistic. So same with mindfulness strategies. They are invisible and yet so super powerful when you're able to add them to your life. So does anyone have any questions before we proceed? And you're welcome to come on camera or not. Just unmute yourself if you have a quick question before we move on. And Dave, did any questions come in the chat? I haven't been following him.
Not yet in the chat, and I'd just
Okay.
like to emphasize if people would like to share what brought you here, or if you have any questions, I'll continue to monitor the chat. Beth, I love your analogy of the oxygen mask on the airplane. Another thing I've been thinking more and more this semester and this past year is the phrase, "you cannot pour from an empty cup." So we need to kind of take care of ourselves, learn things to kind of fill our own soul and spirit so then we can help others.
Great. Yes, perfect. I love that analogy too. I'm a queen of bad analogies. That one's a good one. So I do like that one. And I can't claim the airplane one. That's kind of a common therapist kind of analogy. All right, so we're going to start with the first practice. And as I said, they'll be brief. You're welcome to stay off camera if you ever want to come back on camera after the practice to share your impressions, because I will ask for impressions. So take a moment to find a comfortable seat. I'm guessing you're already seated, and although I can't see you, just allow yourself to be comfortable. It doesn't have to be strong and, you know, like stiff like a soldier, but upright so that you're attentive and you're noting what's going on. Note your mind will wander, and that's normal. That's part of this exercise. So what I'm going to ask you to do here is, once you're aware of your body seated on your chair, wherever you're sitting, maybe you're lying in bed or on your couch, start to direct your attention to something in your body that's either neutral, and that might be the feeling of your feet on the ground or your hands resting on the desk, or something maybe that's even a little bit pleasurable. Maybe you're wrapped in a fuzzy blanket. Maybe you have fuzzy socks on that we can't see even if you were on camera. So take a moment, pick just one thing in your body that's either neutral or pleasurable, and direct your attention there, noticing all the details of that thing that you can. So if it's a neutral thing like your feet, you might wiggle your toes and notice how that feels. You might feel the solidness of your feet on the ground or the floor, the warmth of the feet in socks or fuzzy slippers, or maybe coolness of the feet if they're bare. As you do this, again, you will notice yourself getting distracted, and that is normal. Whenever you get distracted and notice, simply bring your attention back to what you had been focusing on, your feet, a warm sensation, whatever it is. And know that you may do that again and again, and that's okay. And I'll be silent for just another few moments. See if the last 10, 15 seconds or so, again, you can bring your attention back if it wanders, staying with that neutral or pleasant sensation for maybe about 10 more seconds. And then you can allow your attention to come back to me and my voice and the room. That's the end of our first exercise. So I want to ask you what that was like, and I'd love to hear from some of you. Again, it's fine to come on camera, to unmute yourself. I'd love to see who's in the so-called room if you'd like to do that and share, or you can put it in the chat and I'll ask Dave to monitor that. What was that like, to just take a few moments to focus on your feet or something neutral or pleasurable in your body? Anyone?
It was a nice change from just being aware of what's on my screen all day, to be able to actually focus on something that was, well, it wasn't external, because I ended up focusing on my feet, but
yeah, internal with something else. Thank you, Joe. And Tamara also said, kept going back and forth, having trouble not focusing on work. Absolutely, that is not wrong. So I like both of those responses, because Joe talked about starting a shift, and then Tamara talked about trying to shift but going back and forth. And that is that strengthening that muscle, right? The first time we do it, the first few times, the first 1,000 times we do it, we're not already going to develop that ability. We also don't want to criticize our brains for doing what they do, which is produce thoughts. That's actually a pretty good thing. So when we learn about mindfulness, we're getting better at redirecting our attention, not getting rid of thoughts. Those thoughts will always be there. It's just the practice of learning over and over again to redirect attention. And then the one more thing I want to say about that before we move to the next exercise or any other comments is, one of the things that our brain does based on evolution is go to the negative, go to the problem. So Tamara, if you're thinking about work, it might be things you have to get done, the difficult situation you had earlier, any of us, thinking about the problems. When we were all living in caves, like, that was really useful to know which cave had the bear in it, right? There was some evolutionary use to it. Now, today, there's less use for us being in this constant state of high alert, or sometimes we think about, activating the ANS, the fight or flight or freeze mode in our bodies. One of the psychologists I really love, Dr. Rick Hanson, he talks about how our brains are like Velcro for negative things. And the pandemic, that's a big negative, right? We have so much in there that's grief and loss and bad. The good things that are there, not to ignore the bad things, but we ignore the good things. The good things that are there, they slide off like Teflon. We don't stick to them. And I'll say more in not the next exercise, but the third exercise about how we can start working on making those things more sticky. All right, any other questions before we move to the next thing?
I just would like to make a comment that this session is, I think, very important for me, and as evidence, what we've all been doing in the pandemic is trying to balance, work and home and various responsibilities. So my mind has been focused on, the little bit of technical glitches that we had in getting this session started. And then as I tried to settle in with my mind, my wife was yelling up the stairs for my daughter to come down. I hear my daughter running down the stairs. And so, I mean, there's a lot going on for all of us these days.
Absolutely, 100%. And we cannot get rid of that. And it's, it's all part of who we are, not maybe something we'd say we want to get rid of it, but it's all part of our experience. So I'll actually use that to give you one little tip going into the next exercise that we're going to do. And that tip is when those other thoughts come up, notice them and think about maybe allowing them to be a little bit more in the background, not gone, but sort of, I think of it as like, remember when we went to restaurants, that background music in the restaurant that we didn't focus on, especially if you didn't like the song, you just let it fade to the background. So anything that pops up, see if you can let it fade to the background as you work on the foreground of what we're going to do next. So again, go back to finding your comfortable seat. And I didn't say the first time, but you can have your eyes open or closed for these. It's not necessary to have eyes closed. If your eyes are open, I would suggest just softening your gaze. And actually, we're going to use the vision a little bit in this exercise. So you might even want to keep your eyes open. So this exercise is going to involve our senses. Our senses are a really good use for being mindful of our present surrounding. And that's what mindfulness is being present moment awareness, drawing our attention there without judgment, with kindness, with curiosity. So the first thing to do is, the first sense we can use is the most obvious one is usually our sight. So I'll ask that you look around whatever room you're in and silently to yourself, name 5 things that you see. And I'll do mine out loud. So cup, computer mouse, notebook, photo, light, clock. And as you're naming them to yourself, you might still find those other things kind of creeping up into the background, which is normal. Again, let's see if you can settle them into the background. And you can stick with sight, continuing to name things that you see around you. Or you can take this into, we call this the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, where you go through each of your senses. And I will say it doesn't have to, I'll go through it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you want to go through it, you can do one sense at a time. And that would just be, look at one thing you see. Name one thing you hear. Name 3 things you feel. 2 things you smell. 1 thing you taste. So that's I'm sorry, you could do one of each. Mess that one up a little bit. It's okay. So if you want, you can go through one of each of senses. I'm going to take it down through 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So again, we already did 5 things we see. See if you can identify 4 things that you hear. So 1 would likely be my voice. Maybe like I do, you can hear the hum of a computer in the background. Or like Dave said, you can hear family members yelling in the background. It's okay if you can't identify 4 things. Try easy, not try hard. If you only come up with 3 things you can hear, you can take a moment to expand your hearing out further. Can you hear something outside, a bird, something more subtle? Or you can move right on to the next sense, and that is 3 things that you feel. And so feeling in this sense is our touch sense, our physical body. So you might go back to that sense of your feet on the floor. If you're in a place where there's a fan or outdoors, you might feel warm, cold, hot, or sensation on your body. Perhaps it's clothes or a blanket against your body. Or maybe just the feeling of the back body pressing up against your chair or your seat. And then 2 things that you smell. And again, maybe it's not 2. Allow that scent, that fragrance sense to wander outwards. Be curious. Is there any other smell out there? I can smell essential oil right now. Is there anything else for me to smell? And then before we arrive at the last one, remember if you have gotten distracted or even thinking thoughts like, when is she going to end this exercise? That's fine. Draw yourself back. And the last one would be taste. Is there a sense of taste? Have you been sipping coffee or have a mint? All right, and then you can bring yourself back and end this little exercise. So just to reiterate, I did kind of mix that up in the middle a little bit, and I apologize. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 would just be going through each of the senses in turn. We have 5 senses, or you can stick with one sense. And you can stick with one sense 5 times. You can stick with it indefinitely. You can run through each of the senses once. So there's no magic to it. This is again the idea of making the attention more sticky by giving our mind something a little bit more grasping to focus on. You can also add to it by when you, especially for the scene, you can look around and say, I'm going to identify 5 round things or 5 red things. Those things can make it a little bit more sticky for your brain to focus on. So any responses to that exercise? Thank you, Joe, for the thumbs up. How was the distraction when you gave your brain a little bit of a task? Tamara says she had an easier time concentrating. So sometimes giving our brain a task, which, in other contexts, like when we do something like coloring, we think of it as a mindless task, but it's really a mindful task, right? It's just we're choosing to focus our brain on something that maybe doesn't take as much analytical brain power to go around and name things in the room, but it is a brain power task. It is a different way of focusing our attention.
And Amanda Wentworth was saying that it was very grounding, that they didn't remember paying that much attention to things like that before.
And then I see Valerie is saying that part of the room was stressed out. So sometimes you might decide that sight is not the best way to go if you're sitting in the middle of a messy room, right? Or you might look at the mess and see if you can name it without judgment. Pile of laundry, cups on the counter, right? Like that's part of what stresses ourselves out, is not just the thing itself, it's what we attach to it. Like, I have to get that laundry done, I have to do this. All of those thoughts, we sometimes call that stories that we pile onto that. So if you're able to look and notice neutrally, but remember, this is mindful multiple choice, so that might not be the best strategy for you, and that is okay too. That is where choosing another strategy is totally fine. The Christmas tree, I love that. Yeah, I put on I have lights in the background. I have one light, my IKEA star over the shoulder, and other lights in the corner. So you can look into my room too. That's the nice thing about Zoom, right? Is we can peer and spy on each other. So the one other thing I will say before we get to the next strategy, again, about distraction. When you find yourself being distracted, that's actually the magic moment of mindfulness. We can't be mindful until we know that we're distracted. So give yourself a pat on the back for like, oh, I'm thinking about work, because as soon as you notice that, you are doing mindfulness. You are choosing to redirect as soon as you notice. If you're caught up in like that runaway train of lost thoughts, then you're not being mindful at all because you're caught up. But when you notice it, that is the moment that you've come back to mindfulness. And that's Sharon Salzberg, who's a very well-known Buddhist meditation teacher. She calls that the magic moment. It's such an important moment for your practice. So always a little pat on the back as soon as you recognize that, like, hey, I'm doing it. As soon as you recognize it, it's not that you're not doing it, you are doing it. All right, any other questions about that exercise?
Um, I would just share with you that of course during these times that we are physically in a different state than when we were before the pandemic. It at least for me, it's like relearning to see how my senses work because
Mm,
we're stuck in the home. We smell the same things all the time. It's everything saturated. When we couldn't stand looking at the same things anymore, we would just step out of home, take a walk. But there are many things that are different in the way our senses function during these times.
yeah,
So
thank you,
it's
Wesley. Yeah.
interesting that you ask us to focus on each individual sense because some of them are saturated due to circumstances.
That's a great feedback, and also good, great feedback for why that particular strategy might not work, right? If you're oversaturated with all of your senses, then if the noise of your family has just had you up to here and all those other things, right? And certainly getting out for a walk can be a wonderful mindfulness activity and a time that you could also do your senses, right? That you could go through your senses. So know that that's an important point, that in order to do that exercise, you might first need to change environment. I wanted to try to give you options, like if you are stuck in the environment. So if not the senses, maybe you try a different one, or maybe you enhance your sensory experience by turning on music, lighting a scented candle. You do something to give that to your senses, and then choose to focus on that thing. But I appreciate that feedback. Thank you so much. Anything else before we move on? And we're good with time, so don't worry about that. If you have other questions, let me know. I'm trying to keep monitoring the chat too as we go through. Dave put up the link for Sharon Salzberg's information. All right, so this strategy will be a little bit longer, and this is a strategy that comes from the psychologist I mentioned earlier, Dr. Rick Hanson. His work is really grounded in neurology and brain behavior, and so I like the science and the intersection that he's a neuropsychologist and how that impacts this work, but there's so much research support behind it. And this strategy in particular is also to help us overcome that negativity bias, that tendency to get stuck on the negative rather than focus on the positive. And so before I go into this, I want to emphasize, sometimes people think of focusing on the positive is that we are ignoring the negative, or we're taking this Pollyanna approach of, everything has to be happy and good. That's not it. Is that your brains already are good at focusing on the negative. I don't have to teach you how to do that. I don't have to teach you how that, you have 100 papers left to grade. When are you going to get to them? Or you had an argument with your partner yesterday. I don't have to teach you to focus on those things. We've got that. We do it automatically. We are skewed in that direction. So the part that we're actually ignoring is the good things that come up, especially the small ones. And that's what we're going to explore a little bit, that even in a day where I've had a stressful morning today, I think Dave has with trying to get us on today, even in those days, can we find pockets of good? Because things in life aren't usually 100% good, 100% bad. There's a lot more nuance to life. So that's the purpose of this exercise. So once more, find your comfortable seat. And absolutely, you can keep your eyes open. If you'd like to close your eyes for this exercise, this is a good exercise to go a little bit more inward. So the strategy from Dr. Hanson is called HEAL. And HEAL is an acronym. We'll be going through each one. The H in HEAL is pretty simple. The H stands for have a positive experience. That might sound complex. I'm simply going to ask you to call to mind one good thing that happened this morning or maybe yesterday. And as your mind starts searching and eliminating things, I encourage you to latch on to something that seems small, but that was pleasurable. So maybe you spent a few minutes this morning petting your cat. Maybe you savored your first cup of coffee. Maybe yesterday you had an interesting conversation with a spouse, a colleague. Maybe a child said, I love you. So again, not made up, something that is already there and that happened and that felt good, but that maybe it didn't stay with you. That's the part we're going to work a little bit more on, the staying with you part, the stickiness part. So the E of heal is to enhance that experience. And that really means to stay with it a little bit longer. Dr. Hansen suggests that most good things that happen, they're in our awareness less than 10 seconds. Somebody says, I love you, and we have that brief flash of appreciation and it's gone. And so taking these moments right now to stay with that thing, whatever it was. You had a great piece of chocolate yesterday. You noticed that the sun was out. You heard a favorite song on the radio. Just remembering a little bit longer that that happened and that you felt enjoyment, you felt pleasure from it. And that moves us into A. The A is absorb. And in the absorb phase, we notice where we felt that pleasure. Kind of notice in your body when you think about, I'll just stay with the I love you example, the person who said, I love you. Where did you feel that? Did you feel your lips naturally curling up in a smile? Kind of that warm, fuzzy feeling that we get sometimes in our chest or in our belly area. Maybe it was more of a full body enveloping, a full body sense of comfort, of safety. So we stay with it through the enhance the experience, and in that process, as we move to absorb, we notice how it feels. We really notice and pay attention to it. We get curious about it. Lastly, the L is the link. And so linking is coming back to it. Coming back to it when our mind starts to skew, this was a terrible day, where we are able to acknowledge what went wrong. We do that anyway, and see the bright spots. And it's not a but, it's an and. Like my boss yelled at me and I screwed up on that paper and I still have 100 things left to do. And this person told me that they love me, and that felt really good. And so then as you're ready, you can open your eyes if they were closed, let go of that exercise, and let me know how that felt for you to try. Was it difficult to identify something?
I came up with an experience that we had yesterday, just at the family dinner, and it was just a comfortable, relaxed family dinner. Both my children, who are college age, they're home now, and sometimes people can be coming and going, doing their own thing, but everybody just kind of sat down. We were joking, we were laughing, it was happy, and I was reflecting on that.
And so Tamara said it was hard to identify. I was going to type back, but I'll say it to everyone. So, that's normal. And that is harder in recollection, especially when those things happen and you didn't stay with them, right? So this is a strategy you can definitely use going forward. And I think of it as like sending out a spotlight. Like we all become detectives, grabbing your magnifying glass. And as you go through the rest of today, start scanning around. Again, if the negative things come up, those are like the whack-a-mole. You'll see them. You're not going to ignore those. But see if you can look for maybe the spaces in between. Did something good happen? Maybe it'll be this, that you had the time to go to this presentation, right? Maybe it'd be something else that happens later today. However small. Maybe it's that, I think the sun is out today. I don't know, I'm in my basement. So maybe the sun is out. Maybe you step outside and you feel that warmth of the sun on your body, even if it's cold outside. So look for your environment. We scan the environment for threats, scan the environment for good. Send out your feelers, pay attention, and look for those things if they're out there. And I will go through the acronym one more time. So thank you for adding that, Dave. And if you can do a quick research, if you look for Rick Hansen and HEAL, it should take you to his direct page for that if you want to add that out. So H is have a positive experience. Just notice something, see something, have the positive experience. An experience, again, it can be sunny day, taste of tea, something very simple. E is enhance. We start to keep our attention with it. We notice it. We stay with it. And staying with it means 30 to 45 seconds, not a huge amount of time. And during that time, we do the absorb part, and that's feeling it in our body. Where do you sense it? What do you notice? Maybe it's feelings, maybe it's thoughts, but something inside you that tells your body, that tells your brain, this was positive, this was good, this feels nice. And then L is link, and that's kind of the after the fact thing when you go back to it and you allow yourself for even 5 seconds to feel that warm, fuzzy feeling again, like, oh, that was nice, like what Dave just did with his family. Like, yeah, I had that experience yesterday and it was nice and it was calm and it was peaceful and that felt good. So that's sort of the remembering part of that. All right, thank you, Dave. Any questions about that? All right, so we have one last quick exercise and then we will do a little bit of wrap up. And then again, for the last 10 minutes, we have the optional staying for a guided meditation if you'd like. So this one is really quick. It's called Powerful Pose. It comes from the work of Amy Cuddy, who is a social psychologist. And you could do a little hands up or thumbs up. Has anybody heard of Amy Cuddy or familiar with her work? She has a TED Talk that it's pretty well known. Okay, one for Allison, thank you, one person. So if you want to watch her TED Talk, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It's called Powerful Pose or Power Posing. So I'm going to stand up for this. If I can't see any of you except Dave, so you're welcome to stand up or you can stay seated because you can do it seated. But it's the idea of taking up a little space in your body. I'm going to stand. And you might think of this as like a superhero pose, right? I personally, because I identify as female, I think of it as Wonder Woman pose, but you can think of it however you like. So what Amy talks about is the idea of taking up space in our bodies. And I can't see you, I hope you're doing it with me because I'll tell you, I'll give you peer pressure. I did this with admissions in August and they were all on camera and they were all standing up doing it. So I hope wherever you are standing up and doing your power pose. So I'm staying here because Amy showed that if people who stand in this position for 2 minutes, they actually feel more self-confident. They feel happier. They feel better. It works for them to go into a job interview, a difficult conversation, confronting your boss, talking to a student, that they feel better doing this. And it's not this, this is one way to do it. You could stand more like a star pose too. It's the idea of taking up more space. And if you think about, like, if we're sad or anxious, we tend to kind of huddle into ourselves in our bodies. So when we take up more space, in this pose in particular, I can feel this widening across my collarbones, expand across my chest. When I teach yoga, often I'll have people, reach their hands out, feel the width of their chest and across their collarbones, open up across the front, to counter that, again, collapsing inward when we're typing or texting or driving. And just like we did in the heel exercise, you can actually take these few minutes to notice how this feels in your body, to be aware of it, to get a sense of it. All right, then I'll sit back down. And Dave, thanks for standing up with me. Appreciate it. So for anyone who did that, or just how did that feel? Any reactions to that last little exercise? Has anyone ever tried that before? Valerie, you said you had seen it before. I don't know if you've tried it. Thank you, Dave. So yeah, the TED Talk is a fun little follow-up. If you have it, 15, 20 minutes like TED Talks are. It's a fun little thing to watch if you want to check it out. It's really illustrative of like body language things that we don't think of. We know body language is important, but I think we don't really think of, if I am sitting like this all day, how does that affect my mood versus whether I'm sitting more like this? If I'm in a job interview, how does that project versus if I'm very closed this way? And especially now that we have limitations on our body image, and if we're doing Zoom and what we're projecting, to really project the part of us that are on screen as being more open.
This has been a struggle for me, Beth, in this time when we're doing so much on Zoom. And I know I don't have the optimal computer set up right now. I find myself hunching over a lot and feeling the tension in my shoulders and neck. So just getting up like you were suggesting and stretching out, oh, it actually felt so good. It was like I could feel the blood flowing through my extremities a little more.
Absolutely. And remember, this is mindful multiple choice. This is the best multiple choice because there are no wrong answers. So that is one of the things I really want you to walk away from with this. Like Dave said, getting up and stretching, you can stand in that power pose or you can move around, right? Move around and just take up space. Hey, we have 6 feet. Let's take up all of it. So take up that space, get your body moving. Last year when I did a TLC program, we actually did do some movement that was in person. So it was a little easier. When you do movements, one thing I would recommend as a yoga teacher is moving your spine in all directions. We spend a lot of time forward, so also back, twisting from side to side, and then side laterally. And that's the 6 directions your spine goes in. Getting up and moving around in those directions can really help counter that feeling of stiff, of stuck, of smallness in your body.
And Amanda was also saying she didn't realize how scrunched up she's been all day until doing this.
Yeah, which is total mindfulness too, right? Bringing your awareness to that. And we're not usually, and once we get beyond school, when they have you walk around with a book over your head, I don't know if they still do that, but we're not that necessarily doing posture check-ins. And that's I'm going to go into talking about checking in with yourself. That's one way, is like when you first sit down at your desk, to be aware, like, am I sitting in a position that feels comfortable, upright, that gives stretch to my spine? And then when you start to notice your mood shift, that would be a really good time to check in again. Oh, have I changed how I'm seated? Do I need to stand up? Do I need to support my body? I'm on a small laptop too, which is difficult. Do I need to lift my laptop up so I'm not looking down as much? What do I need? And that's going to be different for every single person, what you need. So some of the options for continuing to do this on a regular basis, you could do regular intervals, either setting a timer on your phone. It sounds a little silly to check in mindfully, but sometimes we need that little reminder of, maybe once an hour or 3 times a day that I'm going to check in. And if the senses exercise spoke to you, that you'll look around the room or listen with all 5 senses. Maybe that's your chance for a posture break. You stand up, you walk. Maybe it's a chance just to sit and shift your attention to something else in your body rather than staying focused on your computer screen. You can also do mindful check-ins linked to activities. That's sometimes an easier way to remember and maybe a little less jarring than another reminder on your phone. So that might mean, like, again, first thing you do when you sit down at your desk setup is you mindfully check in. Or before each meal, you mindfully check in. At night, before bed. Even when you're brushing your teeth, that's a really good, we all have to do that, or taking a shower. Those are great times to be mindful, and you've got a lot going on with your senses too. If you choose to do a senses kind of activity with the feel of the toothbrush on your teeth, the taste of the mint, the sound of the brushing or the running water. So little everyday activities like that can be great opportunities for mindfulness exercises. And of course, you can do more formalized mind-body exercises. There are a ton of apps out there. I do have a YouTube channel where I have, since last spring, I've developed a lot of free content, a lot of meditation practices that are all geared toward beginners, all 10 minutes or less, and simple yoga practices as well, because I really do mostly teach beginners and teach a functional practice. So feel free to check that out and give me your feedback on that. I'm really a fan of setting up for success, and I've told people before I'm the absolute opposite of a athletic coach, because I say set the bar low. Lower is better. That's how I function in therapy and in life, is set the bar low and then give yourself that cheering, that pat on the back when you accomplish it. So if your goal for the next week is to do 1 mindful practice, great. Once you do that, you can start building on that. Like, build to the point where you want to be. And there's the old nobody runs a marathon by jumping in the first day. There's the whole Couch to 5K program to help us get to that point. And then the final thing I will stop at is incorporating what's worked for you in the past, which also can be a little harder in the pandemic. But if like, for example, we talked about taking walks. If taking walks are such a relaxing activity and really do help you be mindful and check in and take a break, do more of that. It sounds really basic, but we sometimes forget, or we don't give ourselves permission to do more of the things that are really helpful and useful to us. And remember that oxygen mask analogy, the reason you're doing it is, yes, to help yourself, but so you can continue to be in this environment, part of this community where we're there for students and there for each other. And the best way we can do that is by making ourselves in the best condition that we can be. So I'll take any questions or comments, and then we'll move to the optional exercise for the end. Any questions?
No questions in the chat right now, Beth.
All right. So if anyone needs to leave, this is the point where you can leave. We will only run till 1:30, so we're not going to run over. We'll finish at 1:30 if you are able to stay, and if you're able to stay, great. All right, so one last time, find your comfortable seat. And Dave, you're welcome to go off camera if you'd like, or you can stay on, it's up to you. So let's go through again, is finding our seat that feels comfortable, that feels supported. And that could be lying down, if lying down means that's a place where you feel comfortable and can be alert and staying tuned to my voice rather than falling asleep, which is a little bit of a different exercise. And so some of you mentioned during the exercises today that, in your home work environment, you're in the middle of chaos. And that can sometimes make it difficult to focus on being mindful or relaxing. So this is a time where, to start this exercise, if it's easier to visualize yourself in a different place, on a beach, in a cozy cabin by your fireplace, in the favorite recliner that you used to sit in as a child in your grandmother's house. Choose one of those places, just emphasizing feeling safe and feeling comforted. And if you're in your own environment, see if you can connect with those feelings of I'm safe, and allow yourself to be comfortable. And this exercise, we're going to use another analogy. I'm just using it as a framework. It's not so important, or another acronym, excuse me, not so important that you remember it, but it's AGE. And we'll go through each of the 3 steps of AGE, arriving at a visualization to finish. The first step in AGE is arrive, and that's what we've already done, is taken the time to set up ourselves up where we are, to be aware of this moment, not judging ourselves if we get distracted, knowing that that's part of it. And if the senses activity was helpful from earlier, you might move through some of your senses as you arrive in your space. So what you see, even if your eyes are closed, you can identify blotches or sounds, what you hear, my voice or something else, what you feel with your body, sensations in your body, seated or lying. And then also anything that you smell or you taste. With the next step, G, we'll start to gather our attention. And so like we did in the first exercise, choose a neutral thing to settle your attention on. If your eyes are open, it could be something to simply gaze at. Maybe, like Tamara mentioned earlier, twinkling Christmas lights. Or Joe talked about settling attention into his feet. It could also be your breath. The breath is always something you can choose to focus on if it's easy for you. So we didn't do a lot of breath focus today. If naturally your attention goes to your breath and you can settle it there, as if you're lying your head down on a pillow, that kind of settling your attention there on your breath, and go right ahead. Use your breath if it's easy. And remember, as we continue to settle our attention, you will get distracted. That is a normal part of the exercise. As soon as you notice that distraction, see if you can maybe put some fuzziness around it. Allow it to soften, to fade, to decrease the volume. Draw the attention back to your focus, your breath, your feet, a light. And then in the last step of the age, that stands for expand. And expand is where we maintain our focus even as we expand our attention, allowing whatever is there to be there. And in this exercise, we'll expand our attention using a visualization exercise. We're going to use a light visual. If you've visualized yourself outside, you might choose to think about the light of the sun. Or you can think of any type of warm, glowing light. It can be whatever color resonates with you. Maybe it's a white or yellowish warm light. Perhaps it's purple or green. Whatever light you choose, start to visualize that light, the rays of those light coming down, starting to settle in your feet. Picture the light enveloping your feet, warming your feet, encasing your feet. And then imagine that light starting to travel up your body. That warmth, that glowingness starts to move up your calves, your shins, over your knees, up your thighs, all around your thighs, your quads, your hamstrings. Again, if your light has a color, picture that color of your light. It might even be more like a soft, comfortable lava moving up through your body, through the area of your pelvis, your hips, your bottom. That light is continuing to expand to encompass your torso, your entire front body, your abdomen, your chest, your back body, moving up the spine. Feeling that sense in your body, maybe as the light travels up, it's leaving a sense of warmth, a sense of tingling, a sense of softness or comfort. As the light travels up through your shoulders, notice it traveled down each arm, almost melting through your upper arm, your elbow, your forearms, encasing each finger with this warmth, this glow, this feeling of comfort. And then traveling back up through your arms, through the remainder of your upper body, warming your entire head, feeling that glow on your face, allowing it to soften your jaw, your eyes. And then finally, as that light melts down, finding a center for that light in the area of your chest, what we call the heart center, maybe connecting with a sense of that light pulsing there, being centered there, radiating out through your entire body and beyond. And staying with that for a few more moments, however that feels for you. You can name that feeling, whether it's glowy, soft, melty, warm, fuzzy. Staying with that a few more moments. And then when you're ready, you can let go. And if you have to leave, I understand we went about a minute over. If you have another minute or two to stay, I would love to hear any final feedback or questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Beth. It seems like it's very rare these days to be able to take the opportunity just to kind of sit and focus on, in my case, I was focusing on my breath and just be able to relax. That was wonderful. I'm going to try to take your advice of incorporating this more into the daily routine.
And really, like anything, right? That's how we strengthen that muscle. That's how it becomes more useful and meaningful. And you're welcome. If those of you have said thank you, you're very welcome. I'm happy to do follow-up. I'm happy to take questions via email. I know our questions, our schedules are all really tight. So if anyone has further questions or further follow-ups or want me to come to their department and do something similar, as I said earlier, I did this with admissions before the start of the semester. So I'm happy to adapt to anybody's needs.